The reign of King George III begins against the backdrop of an empire at its height, vast, wealthy, and stretched across oceans. Britain, in the mid 18th century, stands as a global power, shaped by victory, ambition, and the lingering cost of global conflict. Its influence reaches from the Caribbean to India, from the Mediterranean to the North American frontier. Yet beneath the triumph lies a growing strain, debt from the Seven Years' War, political factions sharpening their divisions, and the colonies across the Atlantic developing identities increasingly distinct from the island that governs them. Into this world steps a young monarch, determined to rule with principle and stability. George III inherits not only a crown, but a fragile balance of power. An empire confident in its destiny, yet uncertain of its future. His reign unfolds at the intersection of tradition and transformation, where decisions made in London rippled outward to distant shores and shaped the lives of millions. Balanced Voices begins here with a reign that defined an era, challenged an empire, and revealed the human complexity behind one of history's most misunderstood figures. George III ascends the throne in 1760. He was just 22 years old. He is earnest, disciplined, and determined to be a moral king. In an age of political maneuvering, Britain has emerged victorious from the Seven Years' War. But the cost is staggering. The empire is larger than ever, but so is its debts. Parliament debates how to stabilize the empire, how to govern its far flung territories, and how to ensure that the colonies contribute to the cost of its own defense. The young king believes unity is possible. He believes the empire can be held together through shared laws, shared loyalty, and a shared purpose. But the empire he inherits is already drifting. The colonies are changing. Parliament is divided, and the global pressures of war, trade, and expansion are reshaping the world faster than any monarch can control. George III steps into a role that demands steadiness, but the ground beneath him is already shifting. George III is not a tyrant. He is not a despot. He is, after all, a man of principle. He believes deeply in duty to God, duty to the Constitution, duty to the people he governs. He sees the monarchy not as a symbol, but a stabilizing force in a political world dominated by factions and patronage. He wants three main things: a constitutional monarchy with clear authority, a government free from corruption, and a stable empire governed by law. But the very qualities that make him principled also make him rigid. He distrusts rapid change. He resists political chaos. He believes compromise must have limits. As Parliament fractures into competing factions, George III tries to hold the center. He appoints ministers he believes are honest and capable. He pushes back against political manipulation. He insists on stability. But stability is hard to maintain in an age of transformation. His strength becomes constraint. His convictions become points of friction. And his desire for order collides with a world that is becoming more democratic, more restless, and considerably more unpredictable. Across the ocean, the American colonies are evolving. They are prosperous, confident, and increasingly aware of their own identity. They see themselves not as subjects to be managed, but as a partner in a shared empire, or perhaps something new entirely. Several misunderstandings begin to multiply. Parliament sees taxation as a fair contribution to imperial defense. Colonists, though, see it as an intrusion on their rights. Britain sees unrest as disloyalty. The colonists sees enforcement as oppression. Neither side fully grasps the other's worldview. The distance between London and Boston becomes far more distant than the miles. It becomes a gulf of identity, expectation, and political philosophy. George III is not the architect of this fracture, but he has become its symbol. His insistence on unity is interpreted as authoritarianism. His desire for order is seen as tyranny. His belief in constitutional monarchy clashes with colonial demands for self-government. The Atlantic world is changing, and the king cannot change with it. When conflict erupts, George III faces the greatest crisis of his reign. He believes the empire must hold. He believes rebellion must be resisted. He believes unity is still possible. But the war drags on. Political turmoil deepens, allies falter, the colonies slip away. For George III, the loss is not just strategical, it is personal. He feels betrayal at its core, betrayed by subjects he believed he served faithfully. He sees the revolution not as a fight for liberty, but as a rejection of the constitutional order he is sworn to uphold. The war becomes a wound that reshapes his legacy. In the American imagination, he becomes the villain of the story. In Britain, he becomes the king that lost the colonies. But history is rarely so simple. The revolution is not the result of one man's decisions, but of decades of misunderstanding, pressure, and change. Still, the burden falls on him. In his later life, in his final decades, George III faces a completely different battle. The battle of his health. His periods of mental illness isolated him from the world he once tried to study. Those periods of mental illness have been thought to be either from porphyria or a bipolar disorder. The Regency crisis places power in the hands of his son. The king who once carried an empire now lives in seclusion, remembered more for the war he lost than the decades he governed. Yet history is rarely simple, and legacy is rarely simple. George III's reign is one of the longest in British history. He presides over profound cultural, scientific, and political changes. He supports agricultural innovation and scientific advancement, and the arts. He is a devoted husband and father. He is a man of faith, conviction, and resilience. But the world will remember him for the moment he could not prevent. In the end, the story of King George III is not a tale of a tyrant or a victim, but of a man navigating a world he simply could not control. Balanced voices exist for moments like this. Moments when history asks us to look again, to listen more carefully, and to resist the easy comfort of simple answers. But because we understand the past. Moments like this moment, when history asks us to look again, in all its complexity, we become better stewards of the present and wiser architects of the future. Balanced Voices continues with stories that shape us and the questions that still demand our attention. For those willing to listen, the journey will continue. Next time on Balanced Voices, a cold March night in Boston erupts into chaos. Shouts in the dark, soldiers pressing against the rising crowd, fear tightening like a fuse. A single volley shatters the silence, and in seconds, bodies fall, a city recoils, and an empire trembles. What began as confusion in the streets becomes a political firestorm that races through the colonies. The Boston Massacre and the shot heard around the world. This has been Balanced Voices. Thank you, and have a good evening.